CramerSez.
Welcome. My name is Kramer. This is CramerSez Live, and we are watching this mess behind us. If you haven't been watching it tonight, you really should. Go and check it out if you don't want to watch this, but you ought to be watching what's going on tonight. They are voting on the impeachment of Mayorkas. And it is amazing to me that the Democrats are using the arguments that they're using. The primary argument they're using is this. The reason people are dying of fentanyl isn't because the border is wide open. It's because there's a high supply and a high demand. If they didn't have a high supply and a high demand, people wouldn't be dying of fentanyl. It has nothing to do with the border, and it has nothing to do with Mayorkas. That's how crazy it is. Let's go ahead and turn this up here and listen to them for a bit. I'll be jumping in and out throughout the evening as they continue to do this. Enjoy.
Authorizing resolution that would have afforded Secretary Mayorkas with the standard due process rights afforded to the accused in other impeachment proceedings. Notwithstanding the lack of procedural or substantive due process rights afforded other subjects of impeachment inquiries, Secretary Mayorkas did agree to testify before the Committee on Homeland Security in a January 11, 2024 letter to Chairman Green. In action to schedule an amenable time for such testimony, the Committee on Homeland Security denied Secretary Mayorkas the opportunity to testify. The lack of adherence to precedent and the denial of due process imply that the Committee on Homeland Security has, in the case of Secretary Mayorkas, engaged in precisely the same kind of political stunt Hamilton warned would offer no, quote, real demonstrations of innocence or guilt, end quote.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my point of order.
Withdraw your point of order. Mr. Ranking Member, you are recognized for 5 minutes to talk on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, articles of impeachment are like an indictment in a criminal trial. They lay out the House charges the Senate would examine like a court. Accordingly, I think this resolution would be incomplete without a full recitation of the lack of due process afforded Secretary Mayorkas. This supposed impeachment was preceded in a way totally unlike any other in recent history, unlike the other impeachment of a cabinet secretary nearly 150 years ago. It was not authorized by the House. Secretary Mayorkas was not permitted to present witnesses or cross-examine witnesses or have his counsel present to do so. Secretary Mayorkas was not permitted to testify before this committee despite his willingness to do so. A properly entered request for a minority day hearing to examine the lack of constitutional grounds to pursue impeachment was not acted upon prior to today's markup. Mr. Chairman, the only way this denial of due process, this rejection of 2 centuries of precedent makes only sense at all is if we merely a political stunt to satisfy the most extreme elements of the Republican Party. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter I sent you dated January 26, 2024, explaining in great detail how flawed this predetermined sham impeachment was from the start. As we've already heard from members on this committee who say it's just a matter of time tonight or tomorrow morning or whenever that they will vote to impeach. So their minds made up. The facts don't matter. Now I'd like to address some common misunderstandings about this issue of due process. First, the House motion to refer House Resolution 863 to this committee does not necessarily authorize it to begin a proper impeachment inquiry. The motion to refer simply sent the resolution to the committee rather than have it be considered immediately on the House floor, since it had been called up as a privileged resolution.
Well,
at the time, the resolution
they're going through their little
said
process here. We're going to go ahead and turn this off until they get back to it. They're arguing rules right now. It's interesting. I've been watching this for the better part of the day, and the arguments that the Democrats have come up with. Well, he's not breaking a law. Name one law that he's breaking. There's 6 million extra people in this country that aren't supposed to be here. There's a law against that. That's the law. I'll be headed down to the border this weekend. Headed down with some buddies. And folks, it's time that America starts to be America again. These people that represent us are not our bosses. They are not our authorities. They don't own us. They don't control us if we don't allow them to. That's why I'm headed to the border. A buddy says, well, why are you going down there? You know, it's probably a trap. Good. Let's show another trap in this nation. I think it's time that we show another trap in this nation. Folks, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I look at the things the way that they are. And when I realized with Waco that the federal government would burn men, women, and children alive because they had a gun they didn't want them to have, anything was possible. I'm going to say it again. Our federal government burned men, women, and children alive because they had a gun. By the way, the guns were legal. They just had a lot of them. It scared them. Well, if they were scared of Waco and Ruby Ridge and all of these other, what do you think? How fearful do you think that they were on January 6th? You think that scared them? I can guarantee you that it did. So will this trip to the border. It's not just me. It's not just one. It's not just two. And it's not just us old guys with gray beards. No, it's everybody of every age and every race and every creed because they see what the fuck is going on here. Folks, if you have to be afraid in your nation of traveling through your nation and going to a specific point because the federal government may be watching you, I would say that that's a case for heading to the fucking border. Our founding fathers didn't ask permission. They didn't ask if it was okay for them to do what they did. They did what they were going to do because they were free men. You don't have to ask permission of your fucking neighbor to exercise a right. If you have to ask permission, it's not a right. Let's go back to the hearing here.
And suggest you get someone to yield to you for the rest of those unanimous consents. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment, Mr. Bishop?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Certainly, we have seen in the recent history of the House an impeachment proceeding that did indeed enlist the animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side. This impeachment, I submit, is entirely different. The gentleman from New Jersey earlier said he doesn't know what statutes are violated. I suggest a quick trip through the articles of impeachment. For 7 specific statutory provisions are set forth, each of which has been disregarded, brazenly violated by Secretary Mayorkas and his administration of the Department of Homeland Security. It's very straightforward. I do understand that someone can say, I mean, if you take the position that those statutes can't be enforced by Congress through impeachment, in the face of a statute, in the face of a cabinet secretary who simply decides he's going to disobey them. But I don't believe that's the correct understanding of the power of impeachment, the power of the Congress over the subject of immigration. And that makes this proceeding really, I mean, as impeachments go, quite vanilla. It's straightforward. It is simply enforcing the Congress's determination of immigration policy as reflected in statutory law. With that, I yield to the chair. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carter for 5 minutes for his comments on the amendment to the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my time to the ranking member.
Gentleman yields to the ranking member. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record relevant sections of the Constitution, Jefferson Manual, and the House Rules discussing impeachment, since it really doesn't seem like my Republican colleagues understand how House rules work.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a New York Times article titled "Key Republicans Tell Donors How He Will Pursue Impeachment of Mayorkas," which highlights the predetermined nature of this impeachment effort and explains how Chairman Green promised his political donors all the way back in April of last year that he would deliver the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, telling them, quote, "Get the popcorn," end quote.
I object to the inclusion of that because I've stated on many times in here that I was misquoted in that article. So we're going to object to that.
Mr. Chairman, I move to include it in the record.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table.
Motion to table. Do you want to hand
All in favor.
hand me the writing? In writing? Okay. All those in favor of moving the request to the table, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair.
Recorded vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McCall. Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Chairman, can we stop the clock?
Mr. Higgins votes aye. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest votes aye. Mr. Bishop.
Aye.
Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Jimenez.
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez votes aye. Mr. Pfluger.
Aye.
Mr. Pfluger votes aye. Mr. Garbarino. Mr. Garbarino votes aye. Ms. Green. Ms. Green votes aye. Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez votes aye. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes aye. Mr. Ezell. Mr. Ezell votes aye. Mr. D'Esposito. Mr. D'Esposito votes aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell votes aye. Mr. Strong.
Aye.
Mr. Strong votes aye. Mr. Burkeen.
Aye.
Mr. Burkeen votes aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes aye. Ranking Member Thompson.
Nay.
Ranking Member Thompson votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee.
No.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes no. Mr. Payne. No. Mr. Payne votes no. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Correa. No. Mr. Correa votes no. Mr. Carter.
No.
Mr. Carter votes no. Mr. Tanadar.
No.
Mr. Tanadar votes no. Mr. Magaziner.
No.
Mr. Magaziner votes no. Mr. Ivy.
No.
Mr. Ivy votes no. Mr. Goldman.
No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Garcia. No. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mrs. Ramirez. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez votes no. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes no.
Give me just a second.
Well, they're taking a break here. We'll jump in. I think it's amazing. As you watch this tonight, take a look. Take a look at how ineffective this process is. No wonder nothing ever gets done. These are the games that they're playing in D.C. Let's see how many roadblocks we can put in front of the other side so we can get our way, or at least they don't get theirs. That's what's happening tonight. All of these shenanigans, that's exactly what it's about.
Mr. McCall is not recorded. Yes. Mr. McCall votes aye.
How am I recorded?
The chairman is not recorded.
Chair votes aye. What's the
Chairman
tally?
Green votes aye.
The tally?
On that tally, Mr. Chairman, we had 18 ayes and 14 noes.
The motion is moved to the table, and I think you have 3 minutes and 4 seconds. And thank you, Mr. Goldman, for catching the clock.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record the text of House Resolution 660 from the 116th Congress, which shows how a proper impeachment process can be established, as was done during the 2019 impeachment of then President Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Lalota for 5
I
minutes.
I think I had 3 minutes
Oh,
on my
you got,
turn. There were 3 minutes.
that's true. Well, it was less than 3 because it was 3:04 when he started.
Well, but I think we stopped it. It had gone probably about 40 seconds.
So 2:30?
It's fine.
That works.
Okay, sounds good. Put 2:30 on the clock and it goes back
When he
to the
said it,
starter.
but it had been going for a
No,
while before it was
he had
started.
yielded, so it's his time.
So I yield my time to the gentleman from New York. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I only need 2.5 minutes, thanks.
That's not the first
thank you to
time he said
my
that.
colleague, Mr. Carter, for yielding. You know, I just wanted to respond
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
to what my friend from North Carolina just said, that the articles of impeachment identify specific statutes that have been violated, and cited an argument that those statutes cannot be enforced through impeachment, or at least that's the allegation of, or that's the characterization of what our argument is. That is not it at all.
No, you can't do that.
Those statutes that you have included in your articles of impeachment cannot be enforced with the authorities and resources that Congress has provided to the department. We have completely cut the
Okay,
legs
so here he goes again. It's the
out
exact
from
same
under
argument.
the
They've been
Department
doing
of
it all
Homeland
afternoon,
Security.
and that argument is that, hey, if you don't give us another $11 billion, another $17 billion, another $100 billion, there's no way that we can enforce the laws. That's what they're trying to say. That's their argument. If you don't give us more money, we can't do this. What they're going to spend the money on, folks, is not enforcing the law. That's why the Republicans won't give it up. They're not it's not there to enforce the law. It's there to adjudicate and get more people into the country faster, make it more efficient. They're going to make illegal immigration into the nation more efficient, not slow it down, not stop it. That's why these morons here are playing a very dangerous game, because there are men and women in this nation right now that have lost everything. And then they're seeing these idiots turn around and just hand over the nation $2,200 at a time, $15 billion at a time. They just told us that to house and to feed these illegal aliens, it's going to cost us $500 billion this year. So in the ballparks of $400 billion. Meanwhile, you go across the border and you try to get back into this nation, you get searched head to toe. They enforce all the laws on you. No laws are being enforced on the people coming through. I don't care what the problem is in their nation. Don't give two shits. The excuse that they were using this afternoon, that the Democrats were using this afternoon, what they were saying is that, well, they've got war going on down there. We got war going on here. They got crime going on down there. We got crime going on down here. Why is it our responsibility to be the home for their problems? Why is it our responsibility? It isn't. That's what this is about tonight. Mayorkas has to go. Mayorkas has to get the fuck out of this system, because he's not doing what he's supposed to do and what the law says to do. Remember, there's nobody above the law except illegal aliens and Democrats. No one's above the law except the people entering our country illegally and those allowing them to do it. Folks, if you don't start getting pissed off, if you don't, let me step back here again. I had a conversation with a buddy of mine this afternoon, and he was saying, Kramer, he says, if you head down there and it's a trap in Texas, I said, what do you mean? You mean my government would have a problem with me going down and checking on to see what's going on the border? And if we find people that are trying to come across illegally, that we stop them and say, no, you got to keep going. You can't come through here. You can't do. My government's going to be upset that we do that? That's what they're going to be upset about? They got the problem in Ukraine. They got the problem in Israel. They've got all the crime in all these blue cities. And the problem that they're going to have is that we're going to stem the flow of the people that are costing us $500 billion a year that aren't supposed to be here in the first fucking place. They're going to have a problem with that? Well, then we're going to have a problem with them. The laws are the laws, folks. Remember, they keep screaming, nobody's above the law, nobody's above the law, nobody's above the law. If your son, if your daughter has been killed, raped, attacked, robbed, hurt in any way by these illegal aliens, those motherfuckers in Washington and your state officials, they're the ones that are allowing this to happen. It's not just in D.C., it's in your state capitals as well. What is your state capital doing to stem the flow of illegals into your state? Have they gone to employers and saying, hey, listen, we're going to enforce all these laws. You can't hire illegals. And if we find them on your books, not only will they go to jail and be deported, but you'll go to jail and be, well, whatever. They can't be deported if you're an American citizen. But you understand my point. Folks, we are in a situation here where we're at the corner of a constitutional crisis. We're at the corner of a constitutional crisis and civil war. And if we don't solve the constitutional crisis of a government that's overreaching and will not abide by its own law, it will not abide by its own rules, but expects us to, and puts the boot a little bit tighter under our neck. George Floyd's us just a little bit harder and tells us that if we don't give a little bit more change out of our pocket, pay our fair share, that they're going to have a problem with us. So they've hired 87,000 additional IRS agents. That's what they want. They want complete control of every dime that goes through your bank account, all the way down to $600 per transaction. They're not going to stop there. Eventually, they're going to want every dime. What does that have to do with this? Well, everything. It's control, folks. 100% control from the cradle to the grave. They don't want you speaking. They don't want you talking. They don't want us communicating. They're telling you. What did they just say? What did the WEF just tell the fucking world? We got war going on in Gaza. That's a big deal. Everybody's really upset about it, but that's not the biggest emergency. We got a war going on in Ukraine. People are getting killed. That's not the biggest emergency. Do you know what the biggest emergency is? The biggest emergency for the WEF on the global scale is misinformation, disinformation. And they get to determine what the misinformation and disinformation is. You don't get to do that. No, they and their pals in big tech and the mainstream media, they get to determine what's hate speech, what you're not allowed to talk about. I'm amazed at the fact that you can no longer talk about the word rape. Everybody uses the word grape. Either it happens or it doesn't. Either it's traumatic or it's not. But if it is, then we should probably call it by the name that it is and not be afraid to say what it is. It's horrific. It should never happen. But it does, and we need to discuss it. Child pornography is another one you can't talk about on these social media platforms. They get really upset if you say child pornography. I'm not advocating for it. I don't want it. Who does? The people that are silencing us, obviously. We're trying to stop it. We're working to stop it, and they're silencing our work to stop the crimes against children. They must be the most horrific people on the face of the earth. Let's go back to these idiots here. This is a little bit of a rant there. Okay, we'll be back.
Go through it again, because I guess it isn't sinking in. Purposefully subverting the laws, as the Supreme Court wrote, this is Justice Kavanaugh, said, look, they have discretion. Prosecutorial discretion is the term that he used, that the court used, not only in that case, but all of these cases. And it doesn't just apply to Homeland Security, it applies to the Department of Justice, it applies to the Attorneys General that you brought in here to testify. All of them have prosecutorial discretion, and it's especially protected here because this is in the province of immigration. So, take action, yes, but again, as Justice Kavanaugh wrote, appropriations, Senate confirmation. He listed out several things. I've read it 4 times. I'm not going to read it again. Impeachment was not one of those. So, if you're going to move forward with impeachment, you've got the votes to do it. But please don't act like you've got a constitutional obligation to do it, because you don't. There are other options you can pursue. You're choosing not to do that. That's your right. But you are not required to impeach. And by the way, you shouldn't impeach on this evidence because it's insufficient. The legal standard, which both of the statements that were made, no mention of high crimes, misdemeanors, bribery, treason, no mention of the actual language in the Constitution Not once. And I submit there's a reason for that. And so with respect to the points that have been made about purposely subverting the laws, deliberately defying, et cetera, all of those are manufactured standards. I haven't seen any place where there's a prior impeachment proceeding that uses that kind of language. By the way, back to the point about due process, I had a chance to work back in the 1980s when I was here working for Congressman Conyers, and he led a couple of impeachments with respect to 2 judges. And there was a level of due process protections there that obviously aren't occurring here. And some of those were listed out in the amendment. By the way, it's the amendment, nobody's talked about the amendment really yet, but but the due process piece is important, especially for something of this magnitude. Now, I know you guys are in a rush to get this done. I don't know what the January, early February deadline is. I'm not sure. It's your call. You control the gavel and the calendar. But this is one for the ages. This is historic in what we're doing here today. And so, giving the secretary an additional opportunity for due process, I think makes sense. And the chairman has said, he didn't come testify on this particularly. He did testify 27 times already. But, if you think that it would have been important for more information to be provided or to let his counsel present evidence or cross-examine witnesses or the things that usually happen in impeachment proceedings or any proceeding of this magnitude, why can't we take the time to do that? I don't know what the rush is on that front. With respect to the process too, and I referenced this earlier, I know Congress has the ability to do this, as I mentioned a moment ago, but we did it with respect to those impeachment proceedings. We also did it on the Ethics Committee. And one of the factors that we looked at in making the decision to move forward on a bipartisan basis in a way that drew more than 2/3 of the votes in the House and ultimately led to Santos' expulsion, was we gave him due process opportunities, multiple due process opportunities, none of which have been provided by the committee in this instance. So, expulsion's constitutional, impeachment's constitutional. Both of them are very serious. These are 2 of the most significant powers that the founders have given this chamber. Can't we take the time to do it right? I see my time has expired, but with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that. His time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Lalota for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, it's obvious the 2 parties have different approaches to how to secure the border or if the border is secure and things related, but we shouldn't have 2 views on what is factual. It's been offered by the other side that if you only pass more laws, you'd give the administration more of an opportunity to secure a border, that if you only trust this administration with more authorities, that somehow it would secure the border, while it hasn't done so in the last 3 years. That it needs Congress to go to the Senate to debate and discuss a bill. Well, we did that in H.R. 2 and waiting for them to do something, but let's not make a mistake and let's not confuse the facts. The president doesn't need a single thing more to secure the border, to do an executive order, to remain in Mexico, to stop the repositioning of border agents away from the border, to resume border wall construction, and to cancel mass parole of migrants. The president does not need Congress to do that. Maybe he needs an appropriation of 50 cents for a pen to sign that executive order, but he does not need us to do anything more than we have done already. The second thing that ought to be cleared up, that Secretary Mayorkas was not afforded a proper opportunity to come before this committee, despite his willingness to do so. Well, that's not so correct either, because on 3 separate occasions since August, Secretary Mayorkas was indeed invited to testify before the committee to defend his actions and his lack of actions as Secretary of Homeland Security. In response, his staff either tacitly declined our invitations or engaged in a game of cat and mouse to avoid being accountable for his actions. He never had any good faith to find a mutually agreeable day. He never offered any real times or days to testify. And most recently, on January 5th of this year, Secretary Mayorkas was invited to appear before the committee at our January 18th hearing as a part of the official impeachment proceedings. The secretary then rejected the offer to testify, and his office failed to communicate with our committee and failed to make himself available to testify at another time. Understanding that his declinations would continue and our investigative duties would be stymied, the committee again offered the secretary 10 days from the date of January 18th hearing to provide written testimony. The committee has yet to receive a response. And here's some background on the efforts this committee has undertaken to invite the secretary to date. On August 16th, the committee sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas inviting him to provide testimony about the state of the southwest border and his handling of the crisis that has been raging for nearly 3 years. Nearly a month later, on September 14th, in response to the committee's offer to appear before members and defend its decisions, DHS rejected that invitation. Subsequently, the committee sent another follow-up letter on September 18th, reiterating his request that the secretary appear before the committee. Yet several days after the deadline, DHS again sent another letter declining the invitation, claiming that DHS has limited capacity to support such a hearing request. I think this is disappointing, Mr. Chairman, and under unanimous consent, I'd like to enter into the record the 5 invitations this committee has sent to the secretary.
Will the
Without
gentleman-
objection, so ordered.
Will the gentleman yield?
No.
The gentleman still has some time left.
I yield to the chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize
Chairman?
Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to return to Mr. Bishop's comments because, again, we're supposed to be talking about the legal basis for impeachment or lack thereof in these articles. 2 things. Mr. Bishop noted that there are 7 statutes in the article that he alleges the secretary has not fully complied with. 6 of them, and I have read them, 6 of them have to do with detention, 1 of them has to do with parole, right? All seven are statutes that the prior secretary also used his discretion to follow when he could with the resources that he had, but could not do it all of the time. And so he used his discretion. The former secretary, under the Trump administration, and every administration before that, released migrants into the United States. The Trump administration, over 1 million people. We didn't impeach him for that.
This is the oldest argument in the book. Two wrongs do make a right. That's what he's saying. Hey, you guys didn't do it. And why are you going after our guy? He's doing the same thing you're doing. We shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. That's the whole thing, guys. That's why the American people are so fucking pissed. That's why we're done with this bullshit. That's why there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of men headed to the border right now because they're done with it. They're tired of hearing you feckless men in D.C. sit there spitting at each other, playing fucking games, acting like you're doing something. No different than the idiots over there. What was it, in Providence, I think it was? I think in Providence, that the city came together and they got a proclamation that they wanted the firing, to, a ceasefire in Gaza. And they were so excited and they were just crying and they're just all over each other, so excited about what they had done. And it was nothing. No different than the Save Our Girls hashtag from a few years ago. These measures here don't do anything. Mayorkas is gone. They're just going to replace him with somebody else that's going to do the exact same thing that Mayorkas was doing. Nothing changes, folks. Nothing at all. These men will sit here and tell you how having an open border suits you, that it benefits you, that there's some reason why you should want it. And you're a hater. You're a racist. You're a xenophobe if you don't want your back door open. I think what they ought to start doing is leaving these illegals not in bus stations in downtown New York or downtown Chicago. I think that they should bust these motherfuckers out to their houses, their front porches. Leave them there. Let them figure out how to get out of these ritzy places. Right? Have you ever been to Maryland? You ever been to Virginia? Have you ever been to where these people live? These are nice homes. They don't want the illegals in their neighborhood, trust me. Drop them off in their shopping centers. Drop them off where it infects their life on a daily basis, where it affects their life on a daily basis. Until that happens, until they feel the pain, nothing changes.
So when we focus on the due process afforded to Mr. Mayorkas as part of this rushed impeachment process, you identified one request on January 5th, which offered one date for Mr. Mayorkas to appear. At that time, ironically enough, he was meeting with a Mexican delegation to try to formulate a better working relationship to secure the border, and he was unable to testify. His staff made it very clear to this committee that he was willing to testify on a different date. And their letter was very clear, and the House Republicans, the majority of this committee, did not follow up with an offer of any date. My way or the highway. That is how this Republican majority works. You show up when I tell you to, or you don't show up at all. You come all the way to my most extremist, draconian, xenophobic legislative bill, H.R. 2, or nothing. We will not negotiate. We will not compromise in a divided government where two of the three entities are controlled by the opposite party. Ms. Lee said we have a duty to take action. That is correct. We have a duty to take action to address the problems at the border, not to have a sham political impeachment designed to help a presidential candidate in an election. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger for 5 minutes of discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ivey, I agree with you. This is historic, but it's sad. And I think that at the end of the day, history will definitely define Secretary Mayorkas as the most infamous cabinet member ever for his complete abdication of his responsibility. It is historic. And I think we finally found something we can agree on. And Mr. Correa, I agree. I hope you're right. I hope that at the end of this, the result is change in a positive way. And I think already in this committee, we have seen positive change just today, because for the first time in 3 years, we actually have Democrats admitting there's a crisis. And I will note too, and many of you were not here last Congress, but while we were in the minority, and my good friend from New York City said that the secretary couldn't do his job because he didn't have the resources. Well, that's not what the secretary said. The secretary didn't say that. Secretary Mayorkas came to our committee and he said the border is secure. So that's false. We, for 2 years, asked for a border hearing while in the minority, 2021 and 2022. And how many full committee hearings do we have on border security? 0. Not a single border security hearing for 2 straight years. So when you hear the gentleman from New York City say that the secretary doesn't have the resources, completely false. You know what's funny is this is the only group of 15 people, the only 15 people who can't define operational control are sitting in this room. Everybody else, including the secretary, Mayorkas could define operational control. He defined it to Chip Roy. He looked at the definition of operational control and he said, yes, we have operational control. Everyone in this country knows that we didn't have operational control. Yet we still have 15 people here who can't define it. Why the rush, Mr. Ivey? I'm going to borrow something from my friend from Georgia. Why the rush? For 3 years, we have been demanding change. For 3 years, my community has been ravaged. People like the Tambungas sat here and poured their heart out to the secretary because of their loss. People who lost their children to fentanyl sat here and testified and were scolded in fact. The rush is because just today, hundreds of people have died in this country.
Gentlemen yield.
Due to the fact that this border is open. I'll yield to you in just a second, Lou.
Well, I'd ask you to me because you're speaking to me.
The rush, I'm answering your question from previous debate.
That's fine.
The rush is because for 3 years, we have demanded change, and we haven't gotten it. And there is a complete refusal. I ask you to turn to page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, all the way through the rest of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to look at the exact law that has not been complied with. It says a case-by-case basis parole may be given. We're talking millions of people who have been paroled into this country, illegally entering this country, and released into this country. Because Director Ray sat right there and said, we are still looking for people who match the terror watch list. They are still at large. So you're calling this a rush today. This is not a rush. This is 3 years of us demanding that change happen. He will go down as the most infamous secretary in the history of this country. Mr. Correa, I will yield to you.
Thank you. In August.
Yields to Mr. Carrera. You're
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Chair. Again, we're talking policy difference, August. We did have some hearings over the last 2 years in the Oversight Committee on the Border Security. Tony and I had some of those hearings. We went to Central America. But look, August, we're talking here about difference of opinions. You keep talking about H.R. 2. H.R. 2 never made it out of the Senate. I had 2 or 3 bills that I supported on immigration, never made it out of the Senate.
I think my
Okay,
time has
so
expired.
I'm glad we're talking right now because there's a lot of other things that are going on.
Thank you. My time's expired. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee for 5 minutes.
Despite the hour, I am certainly at this moment not without awe, shock and awe. And August knows that we have had a great opportunity to work together on a number of important challenges, and we have been successful. But I cannot sit here and counter and accept the description of a valiant immigrant, fled Nazi Germany, family fled Nazi Germany, then had to flee Cuba, as someone who is infamous, and the most infamous, if you will, of the public servants of this nation. We've had some. But to indicate that someone who you cannot document violation of the law, you cannot put before me a mountain of evidence that I would then have difficulty in opposing. And then the gentleman's amendment from Mississippi, of whom I rise to support this amendment, clearly is well pronounced. We did not give the Secretary due process. We are accusing and criticizing him for using discretion. Gentlemen, ladies, of which you all are, this is an outrage. We have the authority for our public servants. There's a rumor going around. I've got so many documents here saying that Biden's secretaries and other officials didn't take the oath of office, a video or something atrocious.
Okay,
It's
we're going
one
to come in here and
atrocious
hush her up.
accusation
She's an idiot.
after another.
Yeah, just shut up. You know, folks, it's this is why we're in the situation that we're in. It's disgusting. It's deplorable. Oh, my God. Oh, they're pulling all their hair out. They're lighting it on fire while the nation is a dumpster fire. Nation is a dumpster fire, and she's worried about how it looks. We've never done anything like this before. We've never had. That's what they keep saying. This has never happened before. In impeaching a president twice and not allowing him to offer a defense or have the opposite side, Republicans that they could pick. No, the Democrats picked who those Republicans were. Liz Cheney didn't. Liz Cheney wanted to be picked. Kinzinger wanted to be picked because they weren't Republicans. They're Democrats. Sheeps and wolves in sheep clothing. And this right here, this problem we've got, folks, this is not games. I think it was interesting. One of the other congressmen said earlier that this is not a game, folks. People are actually dying. And the Democrats want us to believe that we're responsible for the citizens of other nations that have problems, that somehow it's our responsibility to open our door and open our wallet and open our homes to people we don't know anything about. They have nothing to do with our culture. They have nothing to do with Americanism. They're just coming here for a job. That's what all of them are saying. Oh, I'm here for asylum, but I need a job. Military-aged men, not families. Men don't leave. Men aren't refugees. Men are soldiers. Children, old people, women, and children are refugees, not military-aged men. They're supposed to be the ones back there fighting and solving the problems of their nation, standing up for their rights. Not coming here and demanding a handout from the American people. Folks, it's not going to get any better before it gets a lot worse, but it's not going to get any better at all until you make your voice heard. I keep saying it. These asshats are not the solution to our problems. The 2024 election will not solve this issue. First of all, it's doubtful that that's going to happen, right? That's what everybody's wondering about. Is it going to be a martial law, or are they going to start a war? What are they going to do to move away from this election, get us away from this election? One of my buddies says that, hey, you know, what they might do is they might get the war going so that all this patriotic talk, about the Constitution, everything kind of falls apart, and then we go over and we fight a war. That ain't happening. We're not going to war without Congress doing its job. And as you can tell right now, they don't know how the fuck to do it. Are you sending your sons and daughters overseas to fight some war for BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street because they're fighting the oligarchs of Russia and Europe? Is that why we're sending our sons and daughters over there? That's exactly why we're sending our sons and daughters over there. If standing right now isn't worth it, if you think that it's time to sit back and let these monkeys, these idiots right here, these fools, these clowns, you think that they're going to be the solution to your problem? They can't even get this right. It doesn't get better before it gets a lot worse.
Situation at the border. Now, we can get into semantics about secure or untenable or chaotic, but the bottom line is, and we've made this very clear for months now, that our system is broken and cannot handle the number of people who are coming to our border. We need to address that system. We need to address the asylum backlog. We need to address the policies and the resources that we have to deal with an untenable situation at the border. Now, you can spin the words and talk about secure operational control, but
legal jargon.
The
He's an attorney.
proof is in the pudding. Because right now, President Biden and Senate Democrats and Secretary Mayorkas are in the midst of negotiating comprehensive border policy deal.
Not without the House, you're not.
That would go further than any Democratic proposal has ever gone before. My colleagues haven't seen it, yet they have said it is dead on arrival. President Trump, former President Trump, has said it is dead and he will fight it to the end. He's not in government now, right? He's not one of the three entities that would actually have to pass it, but he effectively controls this body. So let's not fool ourselves to think that this is a disagreement about what's going on at the border. This is a disagreement about whether Secretary Mayorkas has committed a high crime and misdemeanor. And you don't have to take my word for it, as I know you otherwise
You're
want
a
to
fool.
do.
Fucking monk.
Let's look at the Wall Street Journal editorial board. not known
Scratching
to
your
be
ass and jerking off on everybody. What a
a
moron.
particularly liberal editorial board. In fact, quite well known to be very conservative. At 6:38 p.m. tonight, the Wall Street Journal editorial board published an editorial entitled, "Impeaching Mayorkas Achieves Nothing."
They're right.
A policy dispute doesn't qualify as a high crime and misdemeanor.
Well, that's wrong.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
Could you state the title of the article? Could you state the title of the article again, please?
This is the conservative Wall Street editorial board saying, "Impeaching Mayorkas achieves nothing."
I agree with that. As I just said it a minute ago. They're just going to get some other idiot, some other monkey in there that's going to come in and is going to do the exact same thing that Mayorkas is doing. Nothing's going to change. Nothing will change. The policy will remain the same. Nothing changes. This does nothing, but it shoots a lob against the bow. We're going to play by the same rules you played by last time. But it does nothing, and Republicans know that. That's what sickens me about this entire situation.
Offenses. That seems doubtful. The Supreme Court has not ruled that the Biden catch and release policies are illegal. As for catch and release, and I'm reading, one problem is the statutory, quote, credible fear, unquote, standard for claiming asylum in the U.S. It isn't clear under the law that the administration can legally deport people claiming asylum before they get a hearing. The U.S. lacks the facilities to hold asylum claimants, so they are released to await their hearing.
Why?
And that can take
See,
years.
that's the question. That's
but
the
the problem
question,
is
idiot.
asylum law, as Republicans have long argued.
This is the issue. This is the issue that we're fighting against. This is what we're trying to. Why is that a response? Why do they get to wait here? Why? There's nothing in the law that says they can. They're an illegal in our nation. You're allowing them in. I don't care if they're an asylee. We don't know that for 8 years. What kind of damage can these illegals do in 8 years? How many lives have already been cost because of this policy? These fucking monkeys. These
And Republicans have to decide whether to accomplish anything other than impeaching Democrats.
Gentleman's
Mr.
time has
Mayorkas is
expired.
an easy political
Gentleman's
target.
time has expired.
And impeaching him accomplishes
Gentleman's time
nothing
has
beyond
expired.
political symbolism.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, I now recognize, actually, we have some people in the queue here. Mr. Jimenez is recognized.
Thank you. And I haven't spoken much here, but I want to make sure that people understand where I'm coming from. This is not about policy. This is about breaking the law and not adhering to the law. And Secretary Mayorkas and this administration has used policy as a way to disguise the fact that they are not upholding the law or the will of Congress. And if the theory that I guess I'm hearing from the other side is that the administration has absolute discretion over everything that we pass. Oh, that's what I'm hearing from you all. This is all discretion. It's all discretion. It's all discretion. When Secretary Mayorkas does mass parole, when the law says specifically it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, that to me is breaking the law. It's not a policy. It's not discretion. All right? It says case by case. When he did that, he invited the crisis. He created the crisis. Somebody talked about the fire chief running out of water. Well, I happen to be a fire chief, but in this case, Secretary Mayorkas, the fire chief, actually went to the border, started the fire, poured gasoline on it, and then is complaining, gee, I don't have enough fire trucks to put the fire out. He actually created this. He created it from the beginning. It was on purpose. It was a willful violation of the law. And that's where that side and myself are going to disagree. You think it's policy, I think it's law. And in that case, when we think that the administration is willfully violating the law and they're not, and they have a breach of their constitutional duty, the only recourse that we have at the end, because what? Oh, we're going to do appropriations. We're going to cut the money to Customs and Border Protection. Is that what we're going to do? That's going to solve the problem. The only way that we have recourse is to impeach the individual that's violating the law and the will of Congress.
Would gentleman yield?
And that's what we have to do. And no, I will yield now to the chair. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to say something about the xenophobic comment on HR 2. You know, it's 160 plus countries coming. When I was down, a big group of Russians, and they're whiter than I am, okay? So this idea that an attempt at border security is somehow racist or xenophobic, I mean, that's just, it's ridiculous. It's really not fair. As for the process, it's sitting there. We sent a bill to the Senate. All they have to do is put it in their committee, an amend it to the way they want it. And then it comes into conference committee and we work on it. I mean, that's how the process, it happens all the time with the National Defense Authorization Act. I used to be on Armed Services and we didn't agree. Boy, sometimes we were pretty far off, but they changed it, sent it back to us. We met in conference, this big conference committee. If you've never done conference committee, volunteer for it because it's educational in the process here.
Would the gentleman yield? For a question.
When I'm done, so hold on to the question. So the work's been done. Okay, call it hard right, whatever you want to call it. So amend it and send it to conference, and then that's where we negotiate. That's how this process works. And I did it for several years with the NDAA, and we always passed an NDAA, and it didn't look like the House version when it came out of conference. That's the process. So if you really are serious about it, tell the Senate to do something on that. System is broken. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I mean, we need to fix the laws on the books on immigration. But that's another committee, and I know we've been mocked for making that statement here today, but I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. And yes, it needs to be fixed. As a cabinet secretary, you don't get to say, well, I would like a different immigration system, so I'm just going to implement whatever I want, contrary to what the laws are written. Really, honestly, if Mr. Mayorkas wants the laws changed, he should run for Congress and come here and try to change and get a bill passed to change those laws. Again, that's kind of how the democracy is set up. The secretary didn't just get to say, I'm going to pick and choose. But it says shall detain. And I'd like to read this. The Fifth Circuit, the district court in the United States versus Texas, the Supreme Court refused to decide this issue, made clear the statute specifically provides that the government shall take into custody any alien that has committed an aggravated felony. Yet the final DHS memorandum directly contrary to the statute states, and this a quote from the court, quote, DHS personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction when deciding on to enforce the law. The court added, consider that under the final memorandum, an officer who has reason to believe that an alien was convicted of one of the serious crimes implicated by section 1226C can no longer detain him upon release on that basis. Perhaps most problematic is that an officer cannot, quote, rely on the fact of conviction. Yet that is precisely what section 1226C demands. The mandatory detention of certain criminal aliens who are convicted of certain crimes. The final memorandum says otherwise. Staff can no longer follow the statute's categorical command. This is from Mr. Mayorkas to his people, telling them to disregard the law. This flips the presumption of detention on its head by starting from the premise that an official should not enforce the laws. Now, granted, I'm a physician. I'm not going to mock someone who doesn't understand how to put a chest tube in or what a Boerhaave is. Not going to do that because I wouldn't expect that. I'm not an attorney. There has been a little bit of condescension from some attorneys in here today. No offense, Mike.
All right.
But this is the Fifth Circuit Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court didn't rule on this. They ruled on standing. So they basically said Mayorkas has turned it upside down and done just the opposite in a memorandum telling his people not to enforce the law. I'm sorry. I don't think a cabinet secretary should be able to do
Chairman,
that.
yield from
I yield.
To amend your point, here's another paragraph or two, some language from the lower court.
You got to be quick.
ICE had continued to rescind detainers placed on criminal aliens. It says, rejecting the government's claim that these dropped detainers were necessary in light of limited resources. The court found that the government persistently underutilized existing detention facilities. The average daily detained population in April 22 was less than 40% of the 3-year high.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Thanadar. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to let my time be used by Mr. Ivey.
Gentleman yields to Mr. Ivey. Mr. Ivey, you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. I'll be quick. But, Mr. Chairman, I think, I couldn't tell from what you said, but, you know, the case I was reading is from the Supreme Court. I think the case you were reading from is from a lower court. And I believe that
But it's about two different issues. They were reading about standing.
It's the same statute, though. And the Supreme Court reversed the lower court. So, I'll leave it at this.
I think we're talking apples and oranges, but I'll let you finish, sir.
Well, they're talking on the same statute. 1226C is the statute that they're discussing here. And I'll read it again, but basically what they've said was, on the standing issue, you guys are trying to do something that you're not legally able to do, lower court. And that's why they reversed it. But in addition to that, and I'll go to it again, they also make clear, and this goes directly to the points you guys keep making over and over again about policy issues, and that goes to the issue of the prosecutorial discretion and the inability to have the sufficient resources to keep everybody detained. So let me read it. As the district court found, the executive branch does not possess the resources necessary to arrest or remove all of the non-citizens covered by 1226C and 1231A2. The reality is not an anomaly, it is a constant. For the last 27 years since 1226C and 1231A2 were enacted in their current form, all 5 presidential administrations have determined that resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests. So I'll say it one more time. When you all talk about the catch and release and there are too many people across and you're letting too many people, all of that stuff, those are policy disputes. Now, you can say that they're violating the law, they're willfully breaking the law and all that stuff, but what the court just said there is decisions have to be made, and we're going to give discretion to the executive branch to do it because they don't have the resources to fulfill the statute and lock up everybody or whatever the particular provision is. That's what it says. So when you say you're impeaching for willful disregard and all of this stuff, you are directly contradicting what the Supreme Court has said has been happening for the last 27 years.
Gentlemen, yield.
I'm actually going to yield to Mr. Goldman, but it's
Because I could clear it up.
Mr. Thanader's time.
I yield to Mr. Goldman.
Turn on your light. Turn on your mic, dummy.
Because if we do that, we're going down a route. Let's take, for example, the child separation policy. One judge said it represents one of the most shameful chapters in the history of our country. It is brutal, offensive, and fails to comport with traditional notions of fair play and decency. At a minimum, the facts alleged are sufficient to show the government conduct at issue shocks the conscience and violates plaintiffs' constitutional right to family integrity. Under your standard, that would be enough to impeach the cabinet secretary. Well, let's look at the military ban on transgender people. The district court said there's absolutely no support for the claim that the ongoing service of transgender people will have any negative effect on the military at all. The justification is suspect and likely unconstitutional. The Muslim ban, it goes on and on and on. The reason why this Supreme Court opinion matters is it's directly on point, and it undermines the entire argument in these articles of impeachment. I want to turn just in my last few seconds to finishing the Wall Street Journal editorial. Grandstanding is easier than governing, the board writes, and Republicans have to decide whether to accomplish anything other than impeaching Democrats. Mr. Mayorkas is an easy political target, but impeaching him accomplishes nothing beyond political symbolism. A better idea is to strike a deal with Mr. Biden on serious border security reforms that would restrict his discretion on parole, rewrite the asylum standard, and give the executive other tools to control the border. That's from the Wall Street Journal.
Time has expired.
I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to focus back on what this amendment seeks to address, which is due process, and specifically Secretary Mayorkas' due process. And I appreciate my friend and colleague and ranking member, Mr. Thompson, for raising it, because as Mr. Guest, I believe, alluded to earlier, and he was talking about some of the specifics in the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2024, there was a specific provision that you all had before this hearing started, and it was summarizing here an outside counsel restriction. The measure, again summarizing, would bar DHS from paying outside counsel before all border funds are obligated. That was $2.1 billion as a reminder, and also to prepare for or defend against impeachment. So in the appropriations bill that you mentioned earlier and all the great things it would have done for the border, you specifically called out impeachment before this hearing started and said DHS would not be obligated to engage outside counsel. Now, Mr. Chair, I would like to I ask unanimous consent to include in the record testimony a memorandum opinion for the General Counsel Department of Homeland Security dated January 4th, 2023, titled Retaining Private Counsel to Represent the DHS Secretary in Impeachment Processes.
Without objection, so ordered.
So they're summarizing what they believe is going to ultimately be the basis for this impeachment hearing. And they state, our understanding is that all the Secretary's decisions described in the two articles were made within the scope of his office and implemented administration policy. Critically, there are no allegations of personal misconduct such as treason or bribery. If the House initiates an impeachment inquiry against Secretary Mayorkas in the 118th Congress, we assume that House Resolution 582 would be a reasonable approximation of its contents. To the extent necessary, this response to your question, whether they can engage outside counsel, proceeds on that assumption, and our advice is limited to the circumstances presented by an impeachment inquiry. And they conclude that under these circumstances, we conclude that DHS may contract with and pay for private counsel to assist DHS in representing itself and the Secretary in such proceedings. You want to limit DHS's ability to do so.
Well, the gentleman,
I will not.
Just a
Right?
question.
Sir, there's been a lack of engagement and back and forth on both sides, and I would love to break precedent right now, but I'm going to finish this point since it's very germane to the amendment where a lot of our comments, frankly, on both sides have not been germane. The right to counsel, right? You don't have to be an attorney to know that is a fundamental right to due process, especially, we've all talked about the gravity of an impeachment hearing, especially in an impeachment hearing, and having the ability to counsel. And you all chose in your appropriations bill to limit the DHS's ability to fund private outside counsel with respect to an impeachment inquiry. You did that knowing that we were going to arrive at this destination. We keep saying that this was a purposeful pursuit of impeachment, that this was always the destination that we were going to arrive at. This is further proof of that case. And to the amendment that the ranking member has offered, you want to limit Mr. Mayorkas' due process. That's what's bothersome about all of this. And for all the policy differences, for all the belief that he should be impeached, he should have a right to due process. He should have a right to counsel. You all purposefully went out of your way to limit his ability to do so. With that, I yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. McCall for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Look, listened to this debate for quite some time. Mr. Goldman, you, Mr. Ivey, I'm not sure about you, Mr. Magaziner, you sound like an attorney. Well, whatever. Then you're a well-versed one. You play one well on TV, you know, at hearings. Yeah, at hearings, you play a good one. But yeah, we were U.S. attorneys, federal prosecutors. The statute's very clear. It talks about, from Congress, very strictly, that the statute, and this was the issue in the United States versus Texas case. Statute provides that the government shall, not discretionary, mandatory. I appreciate prosecutorial discretion, right? We all did, right? We always had to exercise, am I going to prosecute this case or not? But this law passed by Congress says shall take into custody any alien that has committed an aggravated felony. And this is like, you know, you're talking about sex trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, firearm, offenses, drug offenses. I can't imagine a Secretary of Homeland that would allow people like that to escape the law and allow them to come into this country. I mean, I think, in fact, Ms. Green talked about a case where a man came in who was an aggravated felon, and we had 2 witnesses for this committee that killed the mother's daughter. And this, to me, is irresponsible. And so, to me, there are 2 prongs here. One, if you violate, you basically say to your agents, as he did in his DHS memorandum, you should not rely on the fact of conviction when deciding to enforce the law. And I know it's the Fifth Circuit, as Mr. Ivey said, but they determine the facts upon which the Supreme Court decides. And they said, Fifth Circuit, it's most problematic that an officer cannot rely on fact of conviction. And then when you look at the oral arguments for the United States Supreme Court, Biden's Solicitor General, right? Biden's Solicitor General says that impeachment is a remedy for abdication of the federal law. So here you have a DHS memorandum saying all aggravated felons can come on in violation of what Congress mandated. And then you have the oral arguments, which say the Biden Solicitor General says, you know what? I agree. Don't have standing here. That's what the Supreme Court said. However, Congress has a role here to play. And impeachment is brought up in the oral arguments between Kavanaugh and Biden's Solicitor General. And Biden's Solicitor General admits that, yes, impeachment is a remedy, because that's the only remedy we have left.
Oh, will the gentleman yield?
Maybe. I'd be happy. I was just when you left, I was singing your praises being a federal prosecutor. We get this stuff. I admire what y'all are doing, but let's be honest.
Okay, yeah, that absolutely. I was just going to point out that the Proligar-Kavanaugh exchange is especially interesting because when Kavanaugh writes the opinion, he does not list impeachment as one of the remedies that's proposed. He, as I read before, oversight, appropriations, legislative process, and a confirmation through elections. So I think it's even, you're making my point even more, the fact that they discussed it, but then he actually thought about it when he was writing the opinion and left it out.
Well, but what he was saying was, okay, Solicitor General, you're saying that that we, Supreme Court, don't have standing here, so Congress has the remedy. And he is punting it to Congress, right? And guess who stands up? Alito, in his dissenting opinion, echoes the oral arguments between Kavanaugh and the Biden Solicitor General.
And
right?
it was dissent. and it was an 8-1.
I know, but it was brought up in the oral argument.
Love the interchange. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize. Okay. Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Be that long. I just want to ask unanimous consent to include in the record a section of the book entitled Constitution Translated for Children.
It seems like we got a technical issue here. We'll see if we can get this refreshed here real quick for you. It's been interesting in this debate so far, going back and forth, how they're trying to justify keeping the border open. That's what they're justifying. No matter what else you think they're debating here, it's about keeping the border open. And that's the question. Why do they want it open? Well, I think we all know why they want it open is because they want free labor. They do not. Let's see if we can do this here. There we go. Maybe it'll restart. C-SPAN's been having trouble all day today. There we go. See it one more time here.
Gentleman's time has expired.
There we go. Okay.
I now recognize. Okay. Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Be that long. I just want to ask unanimous consent to include in the record a section of the book entitled Constitution Translated for Children.
Gentleman's time has expired. I know,
But it was brought up in the oral argument.
love the interchange. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize.
Be that long. I just want to ask unanimous consent to include in the record a section of the book entitled Constitution Translated for Children.
C-SPAN sucks. There we go again. Yep, they're doing it again. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this. They're going to keep doing this. If I can get another signal back and we can get it done, I'll bring it back. But, folks, I've been saying this for the last 2 to 3 years, that this day would come. Where we're at in this nation right now, the constitutional crisis that we're under, the situation of our border being open, we've got a war going on in Ukraine. They want to get us involved in a war in the Middle East. And it won't stop until you do something. Because these asshats can't do it. They're a bunch of monkeys in a cage, pooping and pissing all over each other, and thinking that they're special because one's got a crown. That's what the problem is. And it won't get better. It won't stop. It won't correct itself until you make them correct it. It's going to take you. Just like the Founding Fathers. You see, the Founding Fathers were the people who stood up and said, no, we're not going to do this shit anymore. At some point, you have to be a Founding Father. You have to have the courage of our Founding Fathers, the resolve of our Founding Fathers. And let me repeat what I told a buddy of mine this afternoon. Everything, and I do mean everything, that the Founding Fathers did was illegal. All of it. They were all risking arrest and being hanged. That's what they were risking. So yeah, when it gets serious enough, that's where we'll get to.
You're watching CramerSez.